Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
And it's really nice to have you, everybody here. Thank you for coming, for participating. I would like to present first the members of BRCAI, Camila and Marcele, that are here with us also. I am Soraya. And I would like to present our keynote speakers of this morning, Adriana, Marisol, and Javier. They can present themselves better now if they want to. Please feel free to start and to enlighten us with your talk, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to greet everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here, attending our talk. We're really excited for the opportunity to present in this important venue for Brazil's HCI scholars. This is a paper that was accepted at this year's ALCAI. This is a forum at the CAI conference that particularly fosters controversial risk-taking and boundary-pushing presentations. In this paper, we describe and deeply reflect on our experiences as students from Latin America pursuing HCI degrees in the United States, and we discuss paths towards a more inclusive HCI education worldwide. Now, given that our experiences are key to the paper, we'd like to begin by introducing ourselves. And so I'll go first. I'm Marisol, and then I have a lot of last names. And so I'm from Ecuador, where I'm faculty at a computer science program. And I'm currently on a leave studying a PhD in human-centered computing at Georgia Tech in the United States. My research explores how to design technologies with Hispanic immigrant parents that supports them as they participate in their children's education.
Hi, I'm Javier Tibau. I recently graduated with a PhD in CS from Virginia Tech. I am from Ecuador as well and currently teach and do research there as an associate professor of computer science. In my dissertation, I worked on designing technology-mediated experiences to connect families separated by migration. I worked with Ecuadorian families with very young children living in the United States and using shared music to connect them with faraway grandparents.
Hi, my name is Adriana Alvarado Garcia. I am originally from Mexico, and I'm also a PhD student in the Human-Centered Computing program at Georgia Tech, and I'm being advised by Christopher Ledante. And my research focused on the context of Mexico, where I have been designing contextualized technologies that support social media data migration from online to offline context to account for data gaps and advocate for human rights. And to this end, I have been examining online practices of Facebook groups that generate content about local crime through computational methods, extracting and analyzing large volumes of data.
Okay, so thank you for all those introductions. As you probably noted, all three of us are seeking to use HCI for impacting people and problems from Latin America. And so if you look at HCI problems in the North, you will realize that there are many people pursuing goals very similar to ours. The thing is that the flexibility of HCI in adopting theories and perspectives for understanding the user and their complexity has caught the eyes of many students around the world. They are increasingly seeing in HCI a powerful pathway for social transformation, as we are too. As a result, students around the globe, but particularly those from the often deemed as economically disadvantaged global South, are more and more moving from their countries to pursue an HCI education in what we're calling the global North. So despite the promise of HCI supporting development and social change, getting an HCI education in the North, the global North, poses critical issues for people like us who come from the South and plan to use our HCI knowledge to impact the South. In particular, learning spaces for HCI in the North tend to position our South-centric context at the margins of mainstream HCI. Further, the concepts, practices, and applications that we learn in these learning spaces were honestly created by and for the global North. None of them, thus, consider knowledge produced in countries such as Ecuador, Mexico, or Brazil. So how do students from the South, like us, how do we who are seeking, to use HCI in the South, how do we go about this problem? Our goal in writing this paper was to explore exactly that and to try to see how the field of HCI can actually foster educational spaces that go beyond this North versus South dichotomy. So to do that, we chose to reflect on our own personal experiences as HCI learners from the South in the North. Now, as we progressed in sharing and unpacking our experiences, we were talking to each other and learning from each other's experiences, we realized that we were full of uncomfortable moments and we were full of a lot of frustrations in the classroom. And we struggled then. How do we move away from this frustration and this uncomfortable moment to see all of these problems from a productive light? Our interest in knowledge produced in Latin America led us to learn about Latin American decolonial thinking. This was an important finding for us because it provided us with a strong lens for illuminating the possibilities that we were seeking, and that is to imagine change from our struggles. But what is decolonial thinking and what does it propose? In their explorations on modernity, coloniality, and decoloniality, Latin American scholars like Arturo Escobar, Gloria Anzaldúa, Walter Mignolo, Boaventura de Souza, and others denounced the insistence of the modern world in making Eurocentric knowledge the universal and thus the only valid form of knowledge. These scholars then propose that it is decolonial thinking the way to break away from that and start seeing value in the many other different ways of knowing that exist in the world. For these scholars, a post-colonial perspective, which is very popular in HCI, post-colonial computing, etc., is not enough. They state that because a post-colonial perspective states that colonialism and coloniality are over. And so for Latin American decolonial thinkers, that is not true. We're not past coloniality. We still live in it because coloniality is what founded and feeds our modern world. And so as long as we keep striving for modernity, we keep reproducing the inequities of coloniality. There's no way to escape from that in that view of the world. So what these thinkers propose is that we need to move away from simplistic dichotomies like global north, global south, or nature and culture, or valid, invalid, past and present, because all of them are reductionist. The way forward is to explore ni lo uno ni lo otro, sino todo lo contrario, neither one nor the other, but otherwise. And so the idea of the otherwise is very powerful, but it can only be attained by working in co-creating no longer a universe, no more an idea of there's one way, but a pluriverse of knowledge, where contradicting ontologies and epistemologies can coexist without one needing to engulf the rest. There are three particular concepts that we decided to use for enlightening our reflections in moving away from this North versus South dichotomy. So the first is partial connections, and it's inspired by Marisol de la Cadena, the way she uses it. It helps us to realize, yeah, okay, so it is true, we're not the same. From people from the global North, we're not the same. And we're different, but what do we do with that difference? And so it allows us to realize that there's more to the difference that we can do with. Then we have Gloria Anzaldúa's notion of mestiza consciousness, and that allows us to analyze the moments when we turn our struggles and frustrations into a consciousness that accepts contradictions and actually thrives from these contradictions. And finally, we use Walter Mignolo's idea of colonial differences to look at the spaces where, yes, we were facing what we can call oppression, if that's actually a word that we can use it for our experiences, but we resisted that suppression of our knowledge. And so it allows us to understand what knowledge was being suppressed, why it was being suppressed, and how we dealt with that situation. And then we move to our reflections.
Thank you. So the reflections we present in this work describe our personal experiences, and we don't seek to generalize the HCI educational experience of all members of the South in the North. We talk from where we stand, and we don't write this experience lightly. Really gathering the courage for articulating our thoughts on this matter has taken years. And our solidarity has translated into a safety net. And that has encouraged us not only to reflect, but also to try to do something with our feelings of being uncomfortable. Now, we will briefly present the reflections we share in our Alki publication. So we have divided these reflections into 3 sections: on translating ACI knowledge, on participating in ACI classroom, and on producing ACI knowledge. We structure our reflections on these stages because we consider them the main steps involved in the process of making an ACI researcher. So our first set of reflections focus on translating ACI knowledge. With this, we mean that our first contact with ACI literature and practice felt foreign and out of context. Here, for example, with Marisol's quote, it synthesized this feeling when remembering how she felt about discussing the augmented reality mobile phone, Pokemon Go, being deployed in the context of Ecuador, where, as she expressed, is a place where street crime is pervasive. The reality is that ACI education struggles to facilitate classroom experiences where non-Northern students can easily develop and pursue their interests. For us to fully understand the concepts demanded a deep translation of words and terms and ground knowledge of a foreign context, because most of the readings and concepts presented to us were critically disconnected from our experiences growing up in Latin America. And also, since most of ACI literature is built on certain assumptions about the cultural context, infrastructure, and values of both the users and the place where the research was developed. Therefore, our first contact, again, with ACI felt foreign. So, because those papers reflect a very different reality. However, on face of these disconnections, we believe that a more plurivocal perspective can allow all of us to see we're partially connected, thus illuminating how translating is not equating, but accepting that our mutual understanding is full of gaps. Our second set of reflection focused on participating in ACI classroom. We believe that students' participation in the classroom define them later as researchers. However, linguistic and interest-based differences can hinder participation. In this quote that I share about my challenges when I first arrived to the US and how I never felt in my skin when speaking English, I reflect about these experiences when participating in the classroom. However, this feeling changed when my master advisor, Lyndon Brofsky, made an effort to support learning environments that were more tolerant of differences. She recognized that more than half of the students in the classroom were non-native English speakers, and she encouraged us to organize and express our ideas in our native language, even before translating them into English. And sometimes she also encouraged us to ask for support to other students that speak the same language so they can help us to translate. So by sharing that experience, we aim to highlight that through the support of our professors and our own explorations into the difference that caused our struggles, we develop a type of mestiza consciousness, which refers to a tolerance for conflicting views from which a different space for participation could emerge. Lastly, our last reflections focus on producing ACI knowledge. Given that most impactful ACI literature is produced in the North, Northern-centric perspectives end up defining what is relevant and interesting ACI research topic is, what methods to use for exploring it, and how to write and talk about it. Such a systemic lack of exposure to other views complicate our opportunities to generate knowledge that could impact our Southern context. The quote that we share from Javier here highlights how the dominant narrative for broad impact of our work has also been challenged at times. In his case, having other reviewers demanding justifications for recruitment processes that focus on Latin American participants and families, as opposed to including some white participants. On face of these challenges, we identify the colonial difference within our experiences, and in some cases, we managed to break away from these norms. However, we want to encourage the audience to think, how can instructors, venues, and other students that work with us, how can we work in identifying and acting on these colonial differences?
So the following ideas that we're going to present are not meant to be taken as guidelines for moving forward in decolonizing HCI education. They are not solutions for these problems that we still ought to analyze. Rather, we consider them a starting point for a dynamic conversation that we should be having. And so, language, particularly, not only influences our experiences, but also shapes them. I believe our field, and not just ours, is enamored with borrowed words which we use to express notions that are foreign to English. We use them in place of complex descriptions and metaphors. I myself have used words from Yiddish and Japanese to express feelings of togetherness and union. And when writing in English, using other languages in the right way is usually cherished. However, and particularly when we make mistakes as foreign students of translation and interpretation, even if they could be easily corrected, we are chastised and our participation is invalidated by reviewers, for instance. And so we come to this recommendation that HCI learning spaces could draw from language justice and translanguaging spaces and translanguaging initiatives for shifting power dynamics so that diverse languages can be seen as a source of knowledge rather than a hassle. And so we suggest that HCI educators could leverage and emphasize all students' experiences, allowing them to build connections across their experiences. For example, to build a living curriculum, an instructor could ask students to share their personal experiences with others, and based on those conversations, each student could choose a topic that is foreign to them, research it, and present it to the class so that they can discuss what those ever existing differences can mean for HCI research globally. In particular, HCI instructors could do more to encourage all students to see value in how they make a case for their research focus, as well as selecting and adapting their methods. To this end, instructors can propose research and design projects that locate students in contexts of practice culturally distant to them. In doing this, students will be able to analyze the colonial differences they experience approaching these contexts. That is, to explore what forces of power their methods represent, and how different participants resist to these forces. Further, what aspects of their actions are validated by the universal idea of soundness in HCI, which other aspects should be rejected, and how can researchers from the North and the South resist? And so I want to finish this discussion section with this quote from Marisol de la Cadena about embracing pluralistic views and realizing the value of the differences in perspectives. My world was included in the world that my friends inhabited and vice versa, but their world could not be reduced to mine or mine to theirs. Our being together joined worlds that were distinct and also the same. And rather than maintaining the separation that the difference caused, we chose to explore the differences together.
So we believe our reflections and discussions on them can illuminate further reflections about HCI knowledge and education worldwide. So up to now, we have been discussing our experiences as students. But if we think further, what are the implications of not considering other voices and other ways of doing in the design of technology and evolvement of HCI as research field? And I would like to use the Uber in Mexico as an example. So briefly, Uber service arrived in Mexico in August 2013, and it is currently available in 41 cities across Mexico with 8 million users. Although Uber arrived in 2013, the reactions against the company sparked in October 2014, with major protests against the company because it was perceived as unfair and illegal because, unlike regular taxi drivers, Uber drivers do not pay taxes. So besides the sociopolitical implications and impact of Uber, there are also certain features of Uber that make a lot of sense in the context of the US, but they have been problematic in the context of Mexico. One of these features is Uber Pool, which let passengers match up with other riders heading to the same direction. And this scheme gives riders access to a discounted fare. However, Uber Pool has been used in Mexico as a medium to commit crimes. In most of the cases, it has been shown that the assailants usually request the service through stolen cell phones, and while being in the cars, the criminals assault the passengers. And as a response of these issues, in April of 2018, Uber announced the deployment of 7 features to provide more security to users who use this application. Actually, one of these features is the activation of the panic button that is already used in countries like India or the United States. And although all the safety strategies seem to be appropriate and well-intentioned, the current situation of Uber in Mexico is really it's just a consequence of introducing a technology that was designed for the context of the US and then introduce it to Mexico without considering the different social and cultural norms, as well as the current context of violence that the country is facing. So in addition to the lack of understanding of context, we also think that ACI education could look at these practices more critically. And also there could be a more appreciation for local knowledge. And that leaves us with the question, what do we do in ACI classrooms in Latin America?
And so, drawing from my experience as a professor in Ecuador, I also reflect on what would it mean to decolonize HCI classrooms in our countries. What does it mean to create pluriverses then in those spaces? So one of the cases that I bring to your attention is when I was, like years ago, I was teaching an HCI classroom, and we were exploring with our students possibilities for technology to support women as they face sexual harassment in public transportation in Guayaquil, our hometown, home city. 63% of women in Guayaquil report having been sexually harassed by strangers. Now, when discussing these issues with a CS, computer science classroom, I found the problem that they didn't recognize this was actually a problem because this is a male-dominated space, CS classrooms. Students basically denied this problem exists. And so how do we engage our students and the community to discuss such an issue with this pluriversal perspective so that the perception that there are no problems and I only see problems from my own view can be diminished and we can actually leverage these different experiences in design. And so the last thing that we like to leave you with is what is happening in Brazil. So that's our question. What is the situation in Brazil in terms of the knowledge imparted in HCI classrooms? What about working spaces? What will this decolonizing view bring to your context? And so that's how we end this presentation.
Thank you very much, Marisol, Adriana, and Javier. Does anybody want to answer this question first? I would say a word to start: diversity. Brazil is so huge that we have a lot of diversity here. Oh, here? No, I'm in Mexico. There. And does anybody want to say something about that? About diversity, I would say that where I live in Brazil, it's a really small town, and it's really different reality from São Paulo, Rio, and Porto Alegre, other cities that are bigger. So we have to give examples in HCI classes that are local. Of course, we would say, oh, in Rio, they have this. In New York, you have this. In Mexico, you have this. But they never saw that, only on internet or movies. I have many students that never saw the sea. They never travel on an airplane. They don't know how to speak English. The only time they have access to words in English maybe are computing words and in programming language classes. No, sometimes I have programming language classes and somebody pass by in the corridor and say, Oh, she's English teacher. So it's really, they don't really have contact. It's a lot of diversity in Brazil. So we have to give local examples. This reminds me of the concepts of Paulo Freire that I put here. I asked it here in the chat, so I wouldn't forget. That the concepts of Paulo Freire, they said in the book of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I don't know if you know this book, he say we must speak the language of the persons we want to communicate with, you know? Even if they are students or they are our target users during a project, so they feel more comfortable with the person who wants some give information or receive information. You know? I think it's somehow related. Do you think so?
I'd like to. Do you want Adriana or Javier? I can try. Okay, so the idea that we should speak with our students and our target users using the language, their known words. Yes, I mean, I see it as important in two ways. And at least from our stance, where we were receiving this education in the United States, none of those two ways were actually completely, like, fully supported, or we had to figure it out on our own. And it does make sense as a PhD student, you're supposed to figure things out on your own, kind of, right? But it is better if people around you help you a bit. And so in terms of our language, it is not only our language, our way of looking at the world. So in the paper, we stress also how, for us as Mexicans and Ecuadorians, respect is very important. I don't know about Portuguese, but like the difference between you and as a like tú and usted, those are important differences. And the language doesn't support that, but our minds, in our brains, it keeps being there. So the way when we are talking to our professors, in our minds, they're usted, they're not tú. They don't have that way of thinking. There's no way to translating that. So that definitely hinders in a certain way how we believe we can challenge professors. We were not taught to challenge professors. That is not supposed to be the respectful way to address issues in the classroom. And we're not saying it's better or not. It's just that translation didn't exist. So if you are studying in the North, in any classroom, might be HCI or not, these are issues that our instructors are not aware of, that we're having these issues. Like, and I believe like in Korean students, Japanese students probably have even more of these issues of these understandings in communication. So I think Paulo Freire's speak directly to that, but there's no way that is being taken into account in that context. But then also how we talk to our target users, let's say like that. Yes, there's a bit of like, you need to meet your target users where they are. That is part of what HCI teaches you. But in my case, my target users speak Spanish. And so there's a huge disconnect then between my experience with my target users and my advisor, right? So I am in the middle translating these experiences, saying, well, they view the world like this. And so my advisor is trying to make sense of that from her own global North perspective of me, not even of my. So it is pretty complicated. And so what we're saying is that even though it is complicated, we cannot just move away from it. We need to stay within the uncomfortable moment to try to see, well, how can we make this work better for everybody? I don't know if Adriana or Javier have anything else to add.
Yes, I think just building on what Marisol said about having to translate. In my case, I'm from Mexico, and my research focus on a lot of what I'm doing has to do with all the violence in Mexico. And again, it's similar to Marisol. It's a struggle just to really make others understand what is the level of violence. Like when I say, no, we cannot trust the police, people are like, what do you mean you can trust the police? It's the police. You can trust them. No, well, and just like even just trying to explain like corruption and things like that, it's very challenging. But I guess another issue besides just trying to connect different contexts is how do we, like as a students, how do we make sure that we're applying, for example, correctly the methods that we're learning in the context of the US? Like in many cases, we have to adapt our methods to the context of Mexico, of wherever country we are working on. And in many cases, we also wonder if that is okay. And I think we talk about that in the Alki paper about very briefly about the challenges of adapting those methods, but also about the challenges of not having other people to discuss them, and also just to make sure that we are being as, just applying the methods appropriately. I think that's another challenge. I don't know if Javier has any other comment.
I think the one comment that I wanted to mention is that I did recognize pedagogy by the oppressed by virtue of having had a student colleague of mine at Virginia Tech who introduced us to practices of theater of the oppressed, which I believe is an adaptation of Paulo Freire's by Augusto Boal, I believe, also from Brazil. She was a Brazilian scholar at Virginia Tech. And I unfortunately never had a first-hand experience with participating in one of those events for Theater of the Oppressed, but she claimed that she had had great success at using those techniques with underprivileged youth in one of the big cities in Brazil. And she thought that it was a wonderful experience to engage with those populations. I'm not sure that I have a much greater interpretation of that, but I appreciated her opinion, and well, your suggestion of pedagogy for the oppressed sounds to me like an interesting opportunity for engagement.
I feel related to two things you said. One is that in Brazil we don't have tu and usted, but we have você, it's like tu, more informal, and call someone senhor or senhora. So here in Mexico, I'm really unrespectful to everybody because I don't know when to use tu or usted. I use tu everywhere. And the other thing is that I work with deaf persons who speak sign language, who communicates with sign language. So I have these two. I'm in the middle, and someone speaking with sign language, the other, and they don't read, many times don't read and don't speak written words. And the other side, people that don't even know about this culture, that it's really different from what we are used to. No, it's another world, really different. I would like to ask to Alfredo and André and Cristiano to tell their experience as Brazilians outside Brazil or Mexico, outside Mexico, studying above. Would you want to say your experience? Someone?
Well, I would like to say something about here. Yes, I am Anna.
Hello, Anna, please. Welcome.
Yes, well, I really feel identified with some of the things that you have said here, because I'm a professor in Ecuador, from Guayaquil as well, but I studied my PhD in Belgium, and I moved there with my family. And of course, my son, he learned another language. He learned their Netherlands. And that is really pretty close to English, but there are some words that are quite different. And they also have in that language a difference between usted and tu, like u and ye. So he can do that because he has his Spanish as native language. However, when we moved back, since he didn't use too much words in Spanish, let's say, he was struggling at the beginning when he had to gain more vocabulary, and that is one of the contexts that you need to take care of as well when you are having children abroad. But the thing with the HCI factor is that then I also worked in an administrative office here at the university. And of course, the people that were collaborating with me, they didn't have, let's say, the context of what professors and students do in their classrooms. So it was pretty difficult for them. Let's say we have this kind of software that is used for evaluating the professors at the university. And when you do that, there is a huge impact because they were not aware what a researcher do. So for them, as administrative people, it was a little bit different. Okay, a paper, what is a paper? What's the difference between a poster and a paper and a journal paper and these kind of things? And I had, as a researcher, had to explain that to them so they can be aware of what were these kind of differences. So, of course, the experience, the background is really important here. But what I wanted actually to say is, how can we take care of these kind of things? Because I was aware of what was happening because I am a professor, I'm a researcher. But if I were an administrative person who was head of that department at that moment, it would be pretty difficult for me to explain to them and then as well to pass that to the IT department how to deploy this kind of software, for example. So it could be really nice and it could be really helpful if someone can bring more insights about it. So, well, thank you.
Just I can talk, but I don't want to.
Please, go on.
Or if Adriana or Javier want to do it first. So that is kind of what we wanted to take, like our takeaways when we talked about, with you, Soraya, about like presenting our paper here. And in general, the whole idea of this paper was to say, these are our personal experiences. What is happening besides these experiences between the North and the South, outside the North, right? Because we were aware that our experiences are very specific to, okay, these professors are giving all this Northern knowledge. It's obvious, right? Because we are going to the North. What else are we expecting? It makes sense. But we wanted to see what was the impact of this Northern or Eurocentric view of the world in other parts, right? And so the example that Anita, and I'm saying Anita because she's my friend, the example that she's bringing is very interesting because it doesn't have to do with anymore. It's not so obvious. That's what I'm saying. It is not so obvious like the tú, usted, or like the respectful ways and that are hindering our ability to communicate. It's more operational, I guess. Like how do we explain this different world to people who are working in administration in universities, right? And so, and to me, it's more of like, how do you do that in ways that also harness and value their knowledge? How do you actually recognize that they also have knowledge? It is not us explaining to them how they should do something. And so I think this view of decolonizing is helpful for that, because it insists that everybody has different ways of knowing. The definition of ways of knowing, though, I think they're not thinking definitely specifically about differences between faculty and administrative staff. But I believe it is useful. Well, I don't know what Javier and Adriana think. Is this decolonizing if we are bringing these different people together and trying to engage in a conversation about what is valid for each one of them and why?
Javier, or should I go? Okay. Yes, I think it's the question that Anna made. I think that is something that we keep asking ourselves. How do we start creating these spaces where, as Marisol said, like, it's not about telling others how to, or explaining to others necessarily, but how can we get like some sort of agreement or middle point? And I guess the only answer that comes to my mind right now is that I wish there could be just more spaces where these conversations could happen. Like, for example, in the case of the Alki experiences, we came to these reflections and we realized about them just because the three of us are friends and we have been talking about these issues for a very long time. But I guess the fact that sometimes there is some sort of, like, the fact that sometimes there is just not this space to talk about these issues, or just to talk about, or just to normalize more about talking about the differences. I think that could be something, just normalize to talk about the difference.
Should I go? So, I mean, I think that the what Anita said definitely strikes into that complicated way to define what's important, right? When we're talking to administrative people who have never had an experience writing a paper or a poster or anything, it could be hard to see. I mean, after all, when you look at a poster online in a digital library of ACM or something else, is it, besides like one word, does it look very different in the way that it's indexed? So it could be pretty complicated to explain the power of the difference. And like, furthermore, I think that one of the things that is not so obvious even to us is how those same or seemingly the same looking objects ought to be considered. For instance, I think, at the risk of being very dismissive to some folks, and also oversimplifying things dramatically, a poster in some areas could be as simple to make as just like, I'm gonna grab my paper, condense it into a couple of pages, and slam it onto a piece of really large size paper. But in some cases, for instance, when attending a conference like focused on designing of objects, and I attended this a couple of years ago, and at Designing in Interactive Systems conference, you kind of want to have that poster session be focused on those objects, right? So the effort of bringing your things, your artifacts that you've spent so much time creating for people to be able to interact and give you critique and feedback is, at least to my interpretation, a little different than just bringing a folded piece of paper and letting people read it on the fly instead of engaging in a conversation about it. So I think that in some communities it could be more valued than others, and yet when we identify those objects for evaluation or whatever, they do have like a single weighted appreciation that is, again, if it is so hard to convey in between scholars that these things are more or less important to us, how could it look to a person that is completely unrelated to the whole process, right? So I see the problem.
I'd like to add, just to, because of things you're saying make make a lot of sense right now. I mean, together with Javier and Adriana, the things that you're saying. So to me, the main thing is that as scholars, like in this context, and as professors, our mindset is to teach. That's what we want to do, right? It's like we learn the right way and we want to teach how the right way goes. In the case of Anita and administratives, obviously they don't know. That's our perception. Obviously they don't know, and we're going to teach. And I think this perspective of decolonizing in the pluriverse means that they probably know some other stuff that might be translatable, that also, I mean, translation, the thing that I like about this framework is that translation doesn't mean equation. Like usted and you, right? Usted, tú. There is a translation and there's something that is going to be left behind in the translation that will never be able to be translated. And so like Adriana said, creating these spaces, for instance, in the university, the coffee breaks, right, between people, etc., where we can actually not just let people talk, but also like annoy them with, let's explore our differences a bit more, so that we stop having this idea that we know they don't know, because it's in different scales. It's kind of what we experience in the U.S., and I think it's what students also experience in our classrooms in Ecuador. It is what administrators experience, like Javier was saying. But you, like, not even scholars can agree on what's the value of a poster. How can we pretend, like, go ahead and say to administratives, this is a poster and it has this value? Because not even like communities, research communities agree. So I believe that in the small spaces that Adriana, I totally believe that's a way to go forward. I don't know how those spaces should look like, but it cannot be, it needs to be like, we need to stop trying to normalize. That is, I mean, at least in small spaces, that is just too hard to do, and it just shuts down people.
Yes, and I guess also just looking more into the value of our own experiences. Like one of the things that I mentioned to, I think, to Marisol when we start writing this Alkai, is that I used to think, I grew up all my life in Mexico. And I used to think that people in Mexico, like, we were not able to organize. Like, when I first arrived to the US, I used to think like, wow, people here organize. They have shelters. They make these protests. They make this march. They organize. That's great. In my country, I don't see that. I used to think that way, like deficit, like Mexico, yes. And it really took me a lot of time to realize about all the different ways that we organize, the different actions we take. They just look different because our context is different, because our history is very different, and because even the level of violence and the kind of violence that we experience is extremely different. And I guess is sometimes we even have to start from ourselves to think about our context and to be able to see that there is a lot of value of how things are happening in our own context before going into other places and looking to the north and trying to put it in our own context, like if that could be like a recipe or something, like the perfect recipe. I think that's another thing that it's really important just to keep in mind.
If I may add a comment, I think I do the same thing all the time. I teach in Mexico, but I have foreign students from Colombia, from Chile, yeah. And when I plan my classes, I am using the time frames a Mexican student would take to complete an assignment, because I have a program to complete. So I have to do that. And maybe the examples are more local, because out of 40 students, 39 will be Mexicans. So I was thinking, I do not go and look for examples, as Soraya was saying, examples from other parts of the world, maybe from where my students end, because I do this in advance. So as a teacher, I'm looking at the perspective, and I was hearing you, and I was saying I'm doing the same things, and it's difficult to maybe organize a class where I don't know who's going to come, because I do it with a lot of time in advance. And I've been on the other side. My elementary school was done. My father was a diplomat, so I lived all over the world. And I remember when I came back to Mexico, I would cry and say to my mother, I don't know the song, and everybody sings this song, and I don't know this song. And she would say, well, what does it say? I don't understand anything about the song. And the song was our national anthem, but it has very complicated words if you think as a 10-year-old. So I didn't know the song. And the first time I heard it with my parents, it wasn't a soccer game. And oh, that's the song. I mean, I know, but what I think it's also, that's what's enriching. My PhD, I did it in Spain, and lots of things were different, but being in another culture, having to adapt to another culture is what makes you flexible. I know it's hard, but well, that's my comment.
Yeah, can I just say something brief? So one thing that echoes with me, and I don't know if this is maybe just bringing it too much or sooner than Marisol might have thought to education again, but I was thinking of what you said about adapting your student tasks and homework and whatever to how you think a Mexican student ought to be able to do them, right? And I was thinking, like, one of the things that I'm struggling with as I started or restarted teaching in Ecuador is that a lot of the work that I have to send my students to do is read papers or some papers or books in English. Like, there's unfortunately a lack of more literature, not just better, because that's like a sliding, more subjective way to think about things, but just like more on things and recent things to ask students to read. And honestly, it still takes me, I don't know, 2 hours to digest a complex and interesting paper in English myself. With like, I am a doctor, and so I have no expectation that my students ought to be able to fully accept and interpret everything in a weekend of the readings that I have to do. So one of the things that we've been talking about is also to be able to create communities that might help us create these contents that our students could use in our languages and our contexts. But yeah.
I have like some reflections on what you were saying. So yeah, and there's a somebody commented on the meeting, I mean on the chat, and it's like he says, I think that the cultural adaptation is normal when you move to another culture, and that is true, and that's what we were saying. I mean, you go to the U.S. to get your education there, so obviously you're going to expect a different situation, but the struggle there is that we're thinking of going back, and then how do we, like what's your name? I didn't, the lady who was talking before, I cannot see her name in the screen, but like Marta was saying, yes, I mean, you try, when you go back, you need to reflect a lot on what you are imposing, just like what Tiago is saying, right? Is the problem is when the local culture has to adapt to foreign culture by pressure. And so you become this middle person, right? Who you have all this knowledge of this other culture. It is not only the culture, it's the knowledge that they gave you. And you go back and then how do you actually use it? So the ideas of adapting, yeah, and using local examples, I think are good. But it's more than that. It's like the concepts that they taught us, the way of looking at design, for instance, the process of designing, the process of even this, in the US, there's this IRB idea that we need to ask people before, ask for their consent, etc. It doesn't apply necessarily in that way, the way the process is supposed to go. It doesn't apply to the informality of a lot of our countries and the way people see trust. So how do we adapt? And so the idea of what Marta was saying, I don't have enough, I plan ahead. I think this idea of decolonizing challenges our idea of time or idea of the program and the curriculum because we plan ahead. But as teachers, instructors, we also need to navigate, right, with whatever happens in the classroom. How do we make an environment more pluriversal? If we are constrained by time, is that something feasible? What do we need to do to challenge time in the classroom? I know as a professor myself, we're super constrained because there are things that we're supposed to give to students so that they can become the right type of professionals. But so how do we manage that tension? It makes sense. It's something that I feel like we need to discuss more. Also, the second thing that Marta was saying to me was like, diversity is what gives you flexibility. But there's so many other professors who don't leave. It's not necessarily who don't leave Ecuador. I can say from my experience, a lot of professors in the North have never seen a different context but the North, right? So it's not only flexibility from our side, it's also flexibility from where the knowledge is being massively produced. And it's amazing. Even the whole discussion on racism right now in the US makes sense to Brazil, probably too, makes sense to Ecuador, but not exactly in that way. And the resistance from the US to look at outside makes it dangerous, because then it's like, okay, you have this idea and you want to give it to everybody as a way to become a free society, but it doesn't necessarily apply exactly in the same way. So we need more flexibility from all sides, I think. I don't know. Just a thought.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Marta. I think we are gonna have to coming to a close. I know many people would like to do questions. I would like to know if you have a channel for someone to send an email or something for our inviter.
Oh, I guess we can share our emails here in the chat, if that's okay.
I shared the link to the paper. Maybe you have your email there in the paper.
Yeah. Yes.
So everybody can also read the paper, and their email is there if you want to email some questions or something to them directly. Please do it. I love the comments of Tiago Peralti. I don't know him, but I like his participation. We have some informs also, but I would like to start with the inform from Adriana and Marisol of the workshop, please. Would you let us know more about it?
Thank you, Soraya. I was just going to say before we forget, we're very interested in continuing this conversation for everything related to HCI, social technical systems, etc. So we proposed a workshop for CSCW, and that is happening when is it happening? October
17 and 18.
It was accepted, and so we're going to offer the workshop. We're going to try to bring panelists. Maybe we're thinking big, maybe even Arturo Escobar and other people also from Brazil, to discuss these issues of decolonizing. What does it mean to do it in the classroom for when we are dealing with such a very important issue, which is technology production. It's so massively happening right now. So it was accepted, and if people want to participate, it's going to be way cheaper than it ever was to go to attend a CSCW workshop, right? Because the conference is usually expensive, and the workshop was also very expensive. But because of COVID, things are going to go online. It's going to be more accessible now. All you have to do is go to our webpage, and maybe we can share that. I don't know, Adriana, in the chat.
Yes, I will share that.
Yes, and you will have to write a position paper, but it's just you expressing your experiences in the classroom and how you feel like maybe understanding this colonizing view might help you, or it could be in your workspaces, because also that happens in the workspace, right? So we want to expand these discussions so that everybody gets a chance to give their opinion and share their knowledge. Hopefully you can attend.
Yes, so I shared the site in the chat. Yes, I think it would be a great opportunity because it's going to be online. So
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we give some other informs, please, we'd like to everybody to put on your camera for us to take a picture together of this webinar with our invited speakers, famous speakers, international speakers. Please, everybody turn on your cameras. Let me... if everyone can take capture your image, because there was some time everybody was here making a pose and nobody took the picture. So please, everybody take it. Smile. Okay.
Ana, please.
E onde está? Ó, estou cambiando. Onde está a Marcele? Aqui.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. The picture is okay. It's great. Everybody's beautiful in the morning. I would like to call who? Camila or Marcele that is going to talk about the next webinar.
Marcelo, please.
In Portuguese and English, please. Both.
Bom, eu estava procurando o Cris aqui, acho que ele já saiu, né?
Já.
O nosso próximo webinar vai ser no dia 30/7, né? E quem vai fazer a palestra vai ser o professor Cristiano Maciel, lá da UFMT.
Que nunca fica para foto.
Ele sempre escorrega, né? Sai. Então, o tema da palestra vai ser Vida e Morte, Percursos de Interação, né? Vai falar sobre o projeto Dados Além da Vida. A gente já faz parte da comunidade, já conhece um pouco, mas a gente vai ter a oportunidade de conhecer muito mais. Aproveitando também para lembrar do concurso, né, da Logo. O concurso está com as inscrições abertas, vai até o dia 2 de setembro. E como todo mundo pode se inscrever, professor, aluno, profissional, qualquer pessoa. E o prêmio para a melhor logomarca que vai ser escolhida é de R$1.000, mais um livro da Thalita Pagani.
Que está aqui presente.
Tá aí, né?
Sim.
Obrigada, Thalita.
Thank you, Thalita.
Obrigada, Thalita.
Não esqueçam de curtir nossas redes sociais, estão aí no chat. A gente ontem criou uma página do BRCAI para vincular o grupo existente. Então, a ideia é que a gente consiga, com a página, ter mais ferramentas para gerenciar as informações, os posts. E já está online, já tem alguns, quase 30 inscritos. A ideia é migrar todo mundo que está no grupo, que são mais de 300, para a página. Podem conferir lá, o nosso canal do YouTube também está disponibilizando todas as palestras, todos os webinars. Daqui a pouco vai estar disponível essa aqui também. Obrigada, pessoal.
Thank you, Marisol, Adriana, and Javier for accepting our invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Muchas gracias, vecinos, hermanos.
Thank you for having us. This is very
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
I hope we do more things like this between Latin America community of HCI.
Yeah.
It was really great. And I hope your students can access the video after we publish.
Yes.
We can do the translation, so we have subtitles, no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good weekend.
Obrigado.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.